So, I've been playing Godfall non-stop for the last week in order to reach the endgame and get a good feel for what it's all about. I didn't want to make a video early on fighting low level enemies or right after the story and share my thoughts, because that wouldn't be a true representation of what the game is about. No one plays looters for their story. They play them hopefully for the gameplay loop, that grind. Is it satisfying or not? So games like Warframe, like Destiny, like Borderlands, like The Division, games like Diablo, each one of these has their own systems that makes you either love them or hate them, makes you keep coming back or not. Then we have Godfall, a game that I really enjoyed a lot. The real game doesn't initially start until you hit Dreamstones and the Ascended Tower at level 50. Everything before that feels like it is just preparing you, a tutorial of sorts. So for those of you looking for a quick summary of this video before I do go into depth, it is a looter that has no matchmaking as of yet, no public matchmaking. Its story is honestly instantly forgettable. Its endgame loot grind loop is repetitive, and the resource cost is really high to upgrade some of those legendary weapons. It being repetitive is saying a lot, considering I do play Warframe. Combat feels satisfying but also frustrating at times, so at times it is a hit and a miss. Some bosses are just full of absolute bullshit mechanics that serve more to annoy you than anything else. It's not kind of strategic, a way to fight around the boss mechanics, it's just let's add more fire. Now Valor plates in the game, their version I guess of Warframes, are mostly just visual with the exception of their passives or their Archon Fury ability, which will amplify that passive. Now, is this game worth $60? Honestly, hell no. Free to play live service or a $30 game probably would have served it much better. So let's go a little bit into depth on what I thought of the actual game. Visually, Godfall has, I guess, extra helpings of chrome topped off with over-saturated candy coloured effects, which is bloody hard on your eyes. It honestly is. After a few hours of playing it, it felt like I was staring at the sun once I turned my PC off, because there is a lot going on. It feels honestly at times like the early days of Warframe where Steve was on his particle adventure. You know, it's just a shiny, colourful game. Now, before you think it's all doom and gloom and I'm just going to trash the game, I'm not. Let me just say that at times the combat in Godfall is seriously satisfying. At times, the back and forth of landing the perfect parries to hitting enemies on the weak spots and dealing huge chunks of damage is a really feel-good moment, especially against some of the bosses where hitting certain weak points will cause them to stagger or give you a few seconds of a DPS window to burn that boss down. Then there is the Polarity Attacks, which is where you will attack with your primary weapon, and while doing that it will charge up your secondary weapon. Once you switch to your secondary weapon, it will then deal more damage. Then there is also the mechanic where certain enemies will flash blue, which means you can parry them for a stagger, knock them down to again burn a huge chunk of their health. Then there is the technique attacks. Then there is the building up of breach attacks to break them down and stun certain enemies. Then there is the soul shatter mechanic, which is like Mass Effect or even Anthem's priming and detonating. Then there is the ultimate abilities. Basically there's a lot going on with Godfall's combat, nearly at times too much until you finally wrap your head around it, I guess, at level 50. But the combat can be the best thing about the game. But that's not saying it's perfect. At times the combat feels completely out of sync, in that you could clearly dodge an incoming attack but yet still lose a chunk of your health, but your character doesn't register, doesn't flinch it at all, so there's no response to you being hit, even though you know on your screen it looks like you perfectly dodge it. Now there's also a small cooldown between you sliding and dodging and being able to actually cast your ultimate ability or place your banner or even heal up. You literally have to wait a second before using any of your inputs in order to heal yourself, so in that way you just can't spam your attacks either. Parrying requires you to have not attacked for a second, so if you do just try to spam your melee attacks, then you won't be able to parry a big hit that's coming in or dodge out of the way, which means you're going to be stuck in an animation which will cause you to lose a large chunk of your health or even die. Now, a question I was asked a lot over the last few days while streaming Godfall was, the Valor plates themselves, do they have any personality? And the honest answer is no, not really. They're more visual than anything else. It's not like Warframe, where every frame has got this distinct personality or moveset that sets them apart from one another. Valor plates in Godfall have a passive, that's what sets them apart, and their visuals. Like Mesa, that Valor plate is a poisoned based Valor plate based on the passive that has a 10% chance to deal additional poison damage or ailment. Or Hinterclaw, the kind of end game Valor Plate has a 5% chance to deal more crit damage. Aegis Horn takes 5% less damage, so he's the tanky one. You get the idea. Then each of the Valor Plates will have their own Archon Fury ability, which is their ultimate ability that amplifies that passive even more. Mesa, to use that again as an example, as the Valor Plate, when you cast her Archon Fury ability, will have a 90% chance to deal poison damage and deal 100% bonus damage to enemies that are affected by the poison ailment. Or if you cast Hinterclaw's Archon Fury ability, it will increase his crit chance to 90%. Aegis Horn gives damage reduction to your squad. That's what sets them apart. It's only when you start, I guess, using the augments that you can really amplify those passives even further. But again, I could put enough poison related gear on my Aegis Horn, who has no poison ailment at all, and he would be almost as effective as my Mesa, but just much harder to kill. So the weapons, your amulets, your rings and your augments are much more important than the actual Valor Plates themselves. Especially if you go ahead and get your hands on the hammer that drops a bubble that slows all enemies down, including bosses, to a near standstill. That seems to be the meta in the game already, which will lead me to think that it will probably get changed, because even if you have a low level version of this legendary hammer, you basically just bring it as your secondary weapon. You can drop it, put the bubble down, boss stops moving, and then you can just nuke the absolute crap out of him. Now that brings us to the boss fights. Most of the boss fights are fine, easily beaten high level enemies. Even on hard Dreamstone 50+, these bosses can be beaten, but some of the fights are just straight up exhausting. They just felt really dragged out. The Solaris fight in particular is full of laser beam spam from the skies that then sets fire to the ground, but if you get hit by this laser beam, it will knock you down, which can cause you to get infinitely staggered all over the place, and if you have it on hard difficulty, then 2 deaths and you have to restart the fight. While these lasers are coming down from the skies, one of the boss's other attacks is also to shoot lasers out of its face that sets fire to the ground, while also doing an area of effect explosion that sets fire to the ground, while calling in a floating orb in the center of arena that also, you guessed it, fires lasers that explode and set fire to the ground. So it also has just one blue attack that you can parry for a DPS window, but we noticed that in a squad, if you keep attacking the boss, then he would just spam lasers and it wouldn't use the melee attack to allow you to open it up for a DPS window. So you kind of have to just wait out certain phases till it stands up and walks towards you and starts trying to attack you with its sword. So maybe the fight is bugged, but it was really frustrating. And with the amount of fire that this boss has, it feels like they just said, how much fire can we add to this fight, and they just said yes, just give it all. Now the 2 endgame modes for Godfall are Dreamstones, which are effectively bounties from Warframe, where you can run 2 or 3 investigative missions in order to unlock the final mission, which is a boss fight above level 50. You're basically rerunning some of the scenarios from the main campaign where you're having to fight your way through and fight these bosses. They start at level 50 and are worked their way up to level 60. The Dreamstone version of Macros, the endgame boss, is level 60. But you yourself are capped at 50, so bosses are going to be spongier and are going to hit harder as well. Now the other endgame mission type is an endless type of Ascendant Tower of Trials mission, where you enter an elevator and keep progressing through the levels while enemies scale up with each floor, and then chests or boons buffs, which you get to keep for your duration of the run, become available when you clear a certain floor. Both of these endgames are very repetitive. You're basically doing the same boss runs over and over again like you would in Borderlands, or you're doing an endless survival mission like you would in Warframe to see how many chests you can open before you eventually bite the bullet. Now the loot system in Godfall is pretty much straight out of Borderlands as well. You will get legendary items in abundance. You will get loads of them, showered with them, but each legendary item will have a very distinct primary perk or stat, but they will also have a set of 3 random stats that can be anything from crit chance to curse damage to poison damage to breach amount to weak spot damage and so on. You're basically going to keep rerunning bosses in order to get the perfect roll on some of those legendaries to fit your desired build, whether you're looking for more crit chance, crit damage, weak point damage and so on. So if you get a certain legendary weapon, say a greatsword for example, and you get the same greatsword on your next run, the primary perk will be the same on both of them, but the secondary stats will be completely different. They will be randomized. You can of course upgrade those weapons to add a 4th secondary stat, or you can run the tower the Ascendant Tower, where some of the legendary weapons that drop in that will come with 2 primary perks. Overall, my summary of the game at the start of the video, for me myself personally, is going to stay. It is a game that just isn't going to hold my interest enough to keep jumping into it time and again and grinding the same piece of gear over and over again in order to min-max a Valor plate that doesn't feel like it really has any identity whatsoever. So yeah, let me know what you think. As always, thanks for watching.